Welcome everyone to another Sunday Satsang. Thank you for joining. I'm not sure if you can hear it in my voice or not. I'm a little under the weather, so you may hear me breathing from my mouth intermittently and maybe blowing my nose, coughing. So I beg your pardon in the beginning for what may come or not. Let's see how that goes. Today, all day, I haven't smiled this bright. And it's funny. Satsang starts and my teeth are wide open from eye to eye or ear to ear, as they say. So thank you for joining. And let's see how it unfolds together. Whenever the time for our meeting comes closer, sometimes I find myself contemplating of what would be a valuable concept or a valuable angle to talk about. It may be obvious as it is shared and heard, or it might be a totally new angle for someone who may be listening and it may click. And just playing with that possibility, just entertaining that possibility is a big pleasure in the moment. We, as spiritual seekers, if that's a label we want to use, but very accurately so, we as conscious seekers, consciously we are seeking maybe to find out or to recognize what this life is about, what this birth is about, what is the truth or enlightenment, whatever label or whatever pinnacle resonates with the system consciously, if it does, we find ourselves dissociating or dissociating not in a psychologically like traumatizing thing, but very literally so, like withdrawing, we may find the association being withdrawn to the old patterns or old way of relating. Maybe not even in the sense that we don't engage in it, but even the very engagement in those ways of life or ways of relating with ourselves, with the other, with life, is somehow seen to be not my choice, something that is going on inevitably, and something that where the answer doesn't lie. So what I'm seeking is not in the old way, because maybe fortunately I've tried enough in the old ways, in the ways of looking for outcomes and looking for achievements, looking for love, looking for relationships, or fill in the blank with your own personal whatever uh, portrayed as the very answer to life. And then maybe it was achieved, or maybe we're tired of trying. Or maybe, if we're lucky, we just somehow, through grace, recognize that, you know what, even if I get that, I don't think it lies there. So the belief in the old way of unconscious seeking is seen to be a fallacy. And that in turn gives rise to conscious seeking, where we find ourselves living the narrative that now I'm seeking peace or enlightenment or spiritual growth or union with God, bliss, equanimity, nirvana, moksha, whatever label. Again, these words are just labeled to something that somehow deep down is known that it's there and it's available, and it's choicelessly pulling our attention or interest in spending more time, more energy in the quest of figuring it out within. And as interest or earnestness or maturity happens within the seeking mechanism or the system itself, it might become very tactful or very diligent and on point with discerning the old and the not old. So the suffering and the absence of suffering, or the suffering and the surrender to the suffering, of the one that wants to get rid of the suffering. And then as the process becomes more and more subtle within the system, where we find ourselves hanging out, marinating, spending most of our waking state in this impersonal sense of awareness, within which the old and the new, or the old and the absence of the old is the new, New is not something different. It's just the absence of the old way of relating to myself, to the other, and to the life. And even though there might be a sense of untouchedness, the beyondness from me, the person, and the life, the so-called circumstance and the relationships, the events that are happening to the person or through the person. There might still be a subtle clinging to always staying, always relating, always experiencing from that. And if we can really be pointed to this in our systems, not by effort, but just naturally, if it becomes visible, that this clinging to relating from equanimity is the old way, is suffering. Or it may become clearer when we don't find that impersonal sense of awareness accessible in a certain moment, in a certain event, in a certain conversation, circumstance. And we may find ourselves resisting that. We may find ourselves, oh shit, I've lost it. How do I get back? And that itself is the old way. It might become visible very naturally, effortlessly, that it's not about relating impersonally with myself, with the other, and with life all the time, in every moment of every day until death comes. And it's about not using, not labeling, not attaching our completeness to a certain happening, which is within the flow of life. And again, it has become the old way of relating in the sense that I feel, or that narrative that is trying to get back to the non-personal way of relating, is coming from the belief, deep-rooted, subtle, blind-spotted belief that my happiness, my completeness, what I am looking for will happen or will be felt or will be experienced, will be here, when that is the case. When I am relating to life as the witnessing within which me, the person, is seen to be arising. So if I experience a certain moment within the flow of life as the person, myself, herself, himself, themselves, that's not right. It shouldn't be this way. And it's very sneaky in that way because we have now enjoyed the pleasure of the formlessness that we are. And now the person, because it suffers, because it still is intricately designed with the suffering mechanism, wants to attach itself, bypass the system itself, and attach its identity as the impersonal, formless awareness now that it has opened up. Maybe momentarily, maybe for a long time, maybe for years. Is it possible to surrender to the fact that I may have been blessed with a glimpse of a different way of experiencing or perceiving this, 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 and that's not the end goal of the very seeking mechanism. The seeker may have consciously started believing this to be the end goal, but once we have reached there, is it possible to let go of the belief that it needs to be the case time all the time? And it's funny because when it is unveiling itself to itself, it is confirmed that it is timeless, it is beyond the elements, it is within which all the elements arise, play out, and disappear. It is confirmed that it is unconditional, that everything that can be perceived, that is perceived, that will ever be perceived, that has ever been perceived, is within this, is made of this, and there is nothing other than this. It is confirmed in the very unveiling of itself to itself that nothing bothers it because everything is itself. The whole spectrum of bliss and suffering, the most extreme suffering and the most pleasurable bliss, and everything in between that spectrum is within this. And this doesn't prefer one over the other. So it doesn't prefer not to be the person. It doesn't prefer to always be at peace. It doesn't resist being fierce and being dynamic and out there. Whatever we see playing out and dancing in this play of opposites, play of duality, is an expression of this, within this, is this. And there is no manipulation going on here. No should and should not going on here. Everything is unconditionally what it is. And this is, from this recognition, the statement or the concept that it just is. It is neither good nor bad. It just is. This is where the statement is conveyed from, as a pointer to maybe facilitate the unveiling of this to this itself. So it's not about not being the person and always consciously experiencing the spectrum of life, the flow of life as this. What we will find with our clarity, our maturity, if that happens, or if it appears within this, if it's designed to appear within this, that in that recognition, what is absent is a clinging to the pleasure side of the spectrum, wanting pleasure all the time because it feels good, of course, including the spiritual gifts and spiritual bliss and peace and equanimity and unconditional love. And not to demean these qualities, and not to say that these qualities are not appreciated or not honorable or not worth venerating, or maybe even worth cultivating if that's where the process seems to be going. But it's the absence of attaching the goal of seeking to a permanent state of that, and rejecting and diminishing the opposite spectrum. It's actually the very opposite to what we really are. It creates a bigger conflict than before the seeking even started. So now when suffering arises, it may feel like, oh shit, it's still not done. 3 months I may be in peace and nothing touches me, and the quarrels and the conflicts out there that would have shaken me before, and now they just don't even touch me and leave. And I may be like, oh wow, it's done, which is fantastic. But if suffering arises again, a judgment arises, or worry arises, or maybe some data storage, old emotional data that had been stored in the system comes up, and it may feel surprising in a way that, oh wow, where did that come from? And how can something so ugly can be within me? Or how can I think this, we can call it evil or selfishly or whatever we relate bad to be. So being spiritual or being a spiritual seeker, the growth on the, again, take that word lightly, because the goal is actually the end of needing a goal and needing to achieve the goal. So the growth is in the more or less relative sense is very actually that's not how it's going, but let's just try to express that in a different way. So as the system or the understanding deepens within the seeking mechanism, it may clearly be seen that it's not about being at being at a place of detachment all the time. Maybe that happens in the flow of life. We may reach a place where nothing arises that has the characteristic of registering in a way that we get involved in it. That may very well happen. And that is exactly what absence of suffering is. But is it possible to not cling, not get attached to the idea of the absence of suffering? Because that is more suffering. That is more attachment to outcome. What has happened is that we have, or our system has, made or put, well, initially unconsciously, because that's the only way our system knows how to relate with everything. So it puts enlightenment or absence of suffering or peace of mind or peace or bliss or unconditional love, union with God, fill in the blank, whatever that at most goal seems to be, is somehow held on to as an outcome, as something that may appear in life. And then the belief that my completeness, my happiness, what I'm really looking for is in that outcome. I'm not sure if Rumi said this or Ramana. Please forgive me for not giving the credit to the right sage, because I don't remember who said it. But what was said and what I remember was said, just paraphrasing, is that the desire for the truth, and here the truth means that pinnacle of enlightenment or awakening or whatever, all those names that we just counted, and many more, burns all other desires. And here we can replace the word desire, because how we define the word desire may vary. And maybe we can replace the word desire with attachment, just to make it more clear, if that helps. So we can, yes, so the attachment to gaining enlightenment or gaining truth or realizing the truth burns all other attachments. And in the end, it itself is burnt in the fire of the grace. And I'm totally paraphrasing this. But how powerful are these words? This is exactly what has been said. Even the desire of being one with oneself is the very separation of one with oneself. Here we can call, or one with the God, with the source, with consciousness. And when that one is caught, not that we have to get rid of it, because that will be more attachment playing out. But how fortunate would we be if that becomes visible and awareness lands on that one? And that exactly, the awareness of that one is the new way of relating. Because before, that outcome was maybe love or relationships or money or whatever status, whatever we thought we were when we were unconsciously seeking. So maybe that was the pinnacle of what we thought will bring us completion or fulfill this sense of lack that we, as human beings, away from ourselves, seemingly feel in the system. And then all of that is replaced by total understanding, or again, those labels, enlightenment. Is it possible to surrender the very possibility that enlightenment may happen in this lifetime? And it may sound very heartbreaking and maybe even promoting hopelessness or dystopian in a way. That what a sad thing to say. What a defeat kind of a statement. And yet, if it's really accepted, if we can find ourselves really uninvolved in the possibility that, you know what, maybe complete end of suffering is not available in this life for Gurleen. And is it okay? Is it okay to not want it anymore? Is it okay to not add more doership in wanting to achieve total end of suffering? Is it okay if it's 10% done or 20% done or whatever percent has happened? Is it okay for me to really see that, you know what? If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And in that non-involvement of attitude towards the very goal of life, how it's portrayed, maybe the last piece of attachment becomes visible, and maybe it even falls away. Maybe not. But now I'm not bothered with whether it falls away or not. What freedom? That's freedom. That's less suffering already. And then pain happens, pleasure happens, peace happens, suffering happens. And somehow, at the back of all of it, if not in the foreground, but in the background of all of it, something is just relaxed about it, regardless of whether we find ourselves engaging in the conflict as people, as a person, or not. And then that's already the concept, the framework, the understanding, penetrating. And it's so funny. It's such a sneaky one, like a catch-22, that in order to get it, I have to really, honestly, truly be not interested in it. Like, it's totally the opposite of what we're taught in life. It's so counterintuitive. It's like, what does that even mean? And how is this possible? And yet, if that really seeps in the system, and even just out of curiosity, if not devotion or not really like full earnestness, but even just out of curiosity, if we may experiment with this concept and just say, you know what, I'm not gonna worry, or I'm not gonna beat myself about not meditating 1 hour a day. if that's what I've been disciplining myself to do. You know what? I'm not going to join the satsang today. And if I feel bad about it, okay, but if it's possible, I'm not even going to feel bad about it. So just with these little experiments of challenging our beliefs that we should be doing this. And if we just start with small things and start experimenting that, you know what, let's juggle it up a little bit and see how it goes. And if it's less suffering, if the system feels lighter, and minding and realizing that the system feeling lighter can also be attached to as an outcome. And then we may become addicted to, challenging and becoming rebellious also, because that sneaky one is very sneaky. And then it take on anything that's happening and plug itself in there, because that's the only way we have been taught in this life, and who knows in how many lifetimes of data that is programmed into the system. So that's the only way the system knows to relate with anything. So now if the system feels lighter, the hypothesis or the conclusion might be, oh, you know what? I just need to do what makes me feel lighter. And then one day we're doing all those things and I still don't feel lighter. Because it's not about doing what we are doing. It's not about following a diet, or whether it's spiritual diet, mental diet, physical diet, emotional diet. Oh, Zoom likes my comment. Or maybe it's just copying what my hand was doing. It's not about what we find ourselves interested in. It may be one thing one day and totally something else the other day. And we may find ourselves choosing to do what we feel interested in, or we may totally avoid it and do something else. Let's say I have a family dinner and what I feel like is really just curling up in my couch and not be bothered by anyone. But I may still choose to see my family because it's been 2 months or whatever. So we never know what we find ourselves doing in the moment. And as a consequence of that, it may feel lighter. It may not feel lighter. It may feel heavy. But is it possible to see that feeling lighter is pleasure and feeling heavier, spiritually, emotionally speaking, not just even circumstantially speaking, is also within the flow of life where my completeness doesn't lie. So can I be not bothered by the fact that I should not feel heavier? Is it possible to just let ourselves, life, other flow as it is? And let's just contradict this one as well. whether there is acceptance or non-acceptance, or in other words, resistance to this, to whatever is arising, is also an arising. It's also not my doing. It's also not in my control. And Roger said it very beautifully in one satsang many years back that I listened to also many years back, that even my attitude to the flow of life is not in my control. And in this framework, the attitude is where the peace and the suffering lie. So another way of saying that is that even my attitude to the flow of life is the flow of life. Initially, there has to be a distinction between the attitude to the flow of life and the flow of life. But then as the system matures and is able to pinpoint what's the event or the circumstance or the arising, and what is my attitude as Gurleen, as this body mind organism, to that occurrence. But then eventually, even my attitude is the very flow of life. And that, if seen clearly, can dissolve the attachment to our attitude being a certain way, to be a certain way where suffering doesn't arise. That dissolves the very attachment to enlightenment. And the statement in wisdom teachings that is said that enlightenment has happened when there is no one seeking enlightenment. So it's the end of seeking that may be called as enlightenment. But then there is no seeker there to feel good or bad about it, or to cling to it, or resist it, or to even claim that, oh, it's done. Because the next moment, suffering may still arise, or the seeking may still arise. Then like, uh-oh, done, not done, done, not done. Pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain. Another duality. Papaji, if you don't know who Papaji is, he was also a disciple of Ramana Maharishi, and he has an ashram, not in his body anymore. He has an ashram in India, in Lucknow, and has satsangs on YouTube as well. Someone asked him, Papaji, and he was clearly perceived as a sage and a realized integrated master. And someone asked him, Papaji, are you still diligent in a way that do you still practice? And practice in this question really means that is there still awareness being naturally shining on the arisings of within or without, not as two, but maybe as a question. We can include them both. And then he just said these few words of, till my very last breath. And it's so beautiful, because what this really means is that you never know. It's who knows, and who is claiming that it's done. If there is someone to claim that it has happened, means Something is still there, taking ownership as a doer, that it has been done, and it is not a doing. It is the absence of the very belief in the sense of personal doership, that I am the doer, the other is the doer, and my happiness is to be found in pleasure, 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 or the flow of life. It's the very absence of the one that can claim that it itself is not there. So what to do? Just whatever arises, including the choice of going with it or going against it or disregarding it all. That's also what arises. As peace arises, enjoy it. There's no harm in enjoying pleasure. But if it's leaving, maybe there is a possibility now to let it leave, knowing that it's okay. The suffering lies in me wanting the arisings to be my way, as if getting my way is where it is to be found. So God or source or life needs to be my way, disregarding the fact that me is within life, is within source, is within God. So in a way, me wanting the flow of life or the arising to be my way is also within the flow of life or God or the source. I really thought that I'll be able to make this point in 10 minutes and then we can have a conversation. Or maybe you guys can share and I can breathe with my mouth. But I see now that it's been quite a while since I've been speaking. So thank you for all this energy that allowed me to speak and share. So let's open the space, or let's sit in silence. You can raise your electronic hands and we can have a chat, or not. I see Ranko.
Hi, Gurleen.
Hello, Ranko. How are you?
Very nice.
Good.
Your voice is still very clear.
Oh,
no matter
good.
the circumstance. So
I'm glad.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for doing this, even with this circumstance.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Matt.
Yeah. For me, there is still this question, which will probably resolve, but I feel that maybe sharing about it will be helpful. Why, when, and how seeking starts? For me, that is a very crucial question at some point. because there's different approach to that question. There's approach from like top-down perspective, and they will say, try to find your true nature. Finding your true nature, it will be settled down. Whole problem will be settled down. But there is also another perspective, and I found that another perspective in one of the Roger Satsangs, actually. For me, that was part of my journey, because before that, I was listening a lot of these top-down teachers like Muji, like Rupert Spiro, and those guys are pointing very firmly, find your true nature. That's the main point. But then you have to see practically, what turns the seeking, what starts seeking in your life. And I can see it from my young age. It was always suffering. Always suffering. I didn't realize that actually what suffering really is, this five forms of suffering. So this should be pointed out very firmly in a way for people really to understand what they are seeking, why they are seeking, what is seeking actually in practical sense. That is much, much more important than knowing just about true nature or about theoretical approach. And you really ask yourself practically, and you see your life, your whole life, why you started seeking. That's a turning point. Because now you have much broader perspective on the whole question. Now you can see it's not just, okay, part of it, it's finding true nature. That's okay. But really, really practically, what does it mean? Because the only thing that will stop seeking is stopping suffering, end of suffering. And for me, that's a very, very important question, even a crucial one at some point. So I just felt to share it.
Very well put. And that's accurate in the sense that it becomes almost the need of the hour for awakened beings who find themselves dysfunctional in daily living to come across this framework, or a framework which approaches the seeking process from a bottom-up approach. And for those who are not aware with what that means, bottom-up approach meaning the outside-in approach, where we are delivered with the concepts like this framework that Ramesh shares and Roger shares and many others probably, that what we are really looking for, and even Buddha shared this, that enlightenment is end of suffering in those crisp, clear words. And then he said, well, first was life is suffering. So birth is suffering, life is suffering. Then enlightenment, I'm not sure of the order, but enlightenment is the end of suffering. And the cause of suffering, well, he said desire, but again, how we define the word, maybe clinging to the completion of the desire, which is another way of saying that believing, or the mechanism that operates from the belief, which might even be unconscious. It's not that we're choosing to operate from there, that my happiness is to be found in fulfillment of my desires or in the flow of life. That's exactly what that concept is. And then the way out of suffering, the fourth noble truth. So that was Buddha's framework, where he gave a framework. And then in this framework, it is pointing to another, or maybe some other characteristics of that recognition or that understanding, that it is totally accepting, experientially accepting that there is no doer. I'm not the doer. You're not the doer. There is no doer. life is a impersonal happening, including me, the other, and the life itself, including me taking life personally. And that what I'm really looking for is not to be found in the flow of life, in the outcomes. So what is it that I'm really looking for? Which becomes the really, is like then, well, enlightenment. What is enlightenment? End of suffering. So then the question comes, what is suffering? And that is where in the top-down approach, suffering can be defined as the separation from our true self, or God, or the formless, awakened self. And it is not to, in any way, not to, sorry, now I have to breathe. Not to really say that it is inaccurate or it's not necessary. It is very necessary to maybe be a seeker of truth, or a seeker of awakening, or the seeker of our true self, or union with God, whatever or however this resonates in our system. But what may happen, as we started the talk with that, what may happen is that awakening may have happened, and we feel like that actually bliss is the answer, because in that awakening, bliss is inevitable. The untouched nature of being by the personal self, by the flow of life, is evident. And then we may, or it may be concluded immaturely or too soon, that that is what has to be. And a concept or a framework that may come in life, if it's destined, like this bottom-up approach, can come and say, well, you know what? This has manifested, or there is an arising within this, which is this person, which still wakes up, goes to sleep. We may be fasting, but has to eat, has to communicate. So if those concepts don't land in our experience of life, the bottom-up concepts, we may start bypassing, which is the clinging to the emptiness, or clinging to the formless awakening that may have happened, which is exactly resisting daily living, or resisting anything that we have to relate with as a daughter, or a sister, or a friend, or an enemy, or a colleague. So all those things may just be dismissed cynically, because it is believed that what I'm really looking for is this formless hanging out spot, not realizing all the way that this formless awareness has taken the shape of this person, and this person is made of, and is connected to, is arising within and from this that is being clinged to. So the bottom approach can really bring a new way of relating with daily living, by introducing that it actually is not the presence of bliss that we are looking for. It is just the absence of suffering. Because the bliss might be, or the peace or equanimity might be so palpable in that awakening experience, that we may not notice that actually in that experience, what really has happened is the suffering has dissolved. And suffering in the form of doership, the sense of doership that I've ever done anything good or bad, or I've ever done anything, or anybody else has ever done anything, or that it is in the arisings that this can feel complete. So what I am, which is the awakened, formless self, within which the person is playing and living as the very, if we talk from a bhakti yoga perspective, as a servant of, we can say, God or the inner guru, needs to be accepted back. Because the awakening may itself become a bigger polarization than even before, when the seeking started. And seeking started because we were probably suffering to an extreme where the polarization was so much that it was just like, you know what? That's not what it is. That's not where the answer lies. And the awakening itself, which feels to be the answer and which is part of the answer, which is a very big part of the answer, if it happens, is also related to, in a way, of polarization, that everything else is rejected and this is the answer. And what has happened in that, which we call spiritual bypassing, is the same polarization, the same suffering which created the seeking in the first place. So the awakening has become the source of the suffering, in a way. So that's why being, Roger calls it being a critical thinker, good enough just to realize that it's not in the bliss and the harmless way of relating to life that's where enlightenment lies. No, it's in the non-attachment or to outcome. It's integrating the personal self, where the formless self has penetrated the personal self or is penetrating the personal self, and the personal self is somehow deep within every cell of its being has totally accepted the fact that what I'm really looking for is absence of suffering, which is peace of mind in daily living, which can also be related to as unbroken connection to my source, not consciously, not as living as the awakened self, but even as a person when I'm relating to life. There is this absence of sense of personal doership, which is end of guilt and shame over an outcome, which might not be pleasurable and happen through me. End of blame and hatred and malice and jealousy and judgment, because the system somehow has assimilated that no one else is the doer either. We all are products as human beings, a product of our genes, the blueprint of the sperm and the egg that have come together to make the fetus that we were born as, and the up-to-date conditioning that has been a part of, from maybe since the point of conception to this moment. This conversation is new conditioning. And that is just, it's not that it's consciously remembered, but somehow there is a total understanding, which is a lack of believing that somebody else has hurt me and I hate them. It is seen that what has been delivered to me as the person, as the human being, is pain in this moment through another body-mind organism, which is a product of their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And the blame just somehow doesn't arise. There is absence of pride over the outcomes that may be pleasurable and have happened through me. There is absence of worry and anxiety because it is known that life is what it is, can only be one way, and it is not to be found in the flow of life anyway. So then why worry whether something happens or not? Because what I'm really looking for is not in that happening or not happening. And then absence of expectation from myself that I should be this way or not this way. Expectation to the other that they should be this way or not this way. So basically expectation in the sense that something or life has to be my way. Having a my way that we hold on to, that life needs to satisfy for me to not suffer. That is absent. And then attachment outcome is absent. That if something doesn't go according to my expectation, if there was an expectation, there is no, again, there is no suffering going on in the sense that how could it happen? Now I'm unenlightened because this has happened or this hasn't happened. And that can be called the bottom-up approach or the practical approach. So we may use this framework if it feels interesting to experiment with. And then the awakened formless recognition doesn't need to stay even all the time consciously. Because if there is something within us that feels like that needs to be here all the time experientially, is attachment to outcome. It is seen that it is the attachment to needing it to stay is what is the problem, not its absence. It's if the needing for the formless awareness to stay, that needing attitude is absent. So whether that formless experiential awakened way of relating, whether if it's in the foreground or consciously, experientially there or not, it doesn't matter because the clinging is absent. It needing to be my way is absent. And the bottom-up approach, the practical approach, especially if the awakening to this formless self has happened, can be very useful and is probably a life-saving approach. Because because it is very heartbreaking when awakening has happened and we still feel like it's not good enough, we're not happy. And it feels like, then what now? Like, what was all this for? I'm actually worse off than before. It may feel like that. And some people call it dark night of the soul even. Because the disillusionment has happened, the unveiling has happened, and yet the suffering is there. So that actually might be grace if we are able to see that it's the presence of suffering that's the problem, not the awakening self being there or not being there in experience. So yes, very well put, Ranko, and thank you for this opportunity to expand on it.
Yeah, just one short. I won't be bothering you too much. I think the crucial part is really to recognize what is suffering. Because the suffering, there's different definitions. So people are mixing suffering with pain. It's very important to have this suffering detector in yourself. So for me, a very good word is discomfort. For me, a very good word is like uncomfortableness. That is how we can recognize and distinguish what is pain and what is really suffering. So in a way, it could be useful if somebody is practicing things like this to really recognize what is what, and have this detector. In every case, it will detect. Even if you are applying some concept from top-down perspective and suffering is there, you will be able to see that this is the case. So that is the practical approach, I think.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And that's, I just feel like relating what you said to that statement, that the desire of the truth or union with oneself or God burns all the other desires. And then in the end, it itself is burnt. So that integration through the bottom-up approach of suffering coming into awareness and somehow leaving the system or becoming weaker is the desire to enlightenment burning away itself. So very well put. Thank you for pointing this out. Be Sunday, morning or night, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining again and holding space for me while I couldn't think or talk or had to take a breather. It's an honor to be here in this way with you together. Thank you for joining again. Until next Sunday. Same time, same place. I love you all.